All right, we are back with another episode of UFC Main Event Challenge with Caio Borralho taking on Jared Cannonier. So let's break down these two guys' games, talk about who's going to win next Saturday. Jared Cannonier is 40 years old. He is 5'11" with a 77.5-inch reach. That is 180 centimeters and 197 centimeters in reach, compared to Caio Borralho, who is 185 centimeters and 191 centimeters in reach. So if we take a look, he's actually 5 centimeters taller, but has 6 centimeters less in reach, and notably 9 years younger than Jared Cannonier. Let's go over their recent records. Jared Cannonier just lost to Nassourdine by what a lot of people would say is a early stoppage in round 4. Prior to that, he was winning 2 out of the 3 rounds on 2 of the judges' scorecards, 1 out of the 3 rounds on the 3rd judge's scorecard, in a very close and competitive fight. Before that, he beat Marvin Vettori, beat Sean Strickland in a split decision, lost to Israel Adesanya, and then if we go back further, he knocked out Derek Brunson in round 2, beat up Kelvin Gastelum by decision, and then lost to Robert Whittaker. And we don't really need to go past those events. Let's take a look at Caio Borralho. So Caio beat Paul Craig. He beat Abus Magomedov by decision. He rear naked choked Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, and he decisioned Mahmoud Muradov, Armen Petrosian, Gadziev, Jesse Murray, Aaron Jeffrey, and those were on the Contender Series. So in the UFC, he has decision, rear naked choke, decision, and then he finally puts out Paul Craig. So this is a bit of an interesting matchup. We have an Olgar versus Jared Cannonier, which is very reminiscent of Nassourdine versus Jared Cannonier. But it's, while reminiscent of that kind of stylistic young versus old guy matchup, it is significantly different, and we'll go over why that is. In terms of Caio Borralho, usually he does fight fighters who are, in theory, better strikers than him, and he needs to wrestle them to get his wins, where you do see, a rear naked choke on his record, but a lot of decisions because he usually out wrestles his opponents. So he's a grinder. He does have decent wrestling. He's able to mix in his wrestling with his striking and go to what serves him best. That brings me to the Paul Craig fight. He did not knock out Paul Craig in round 2, and he did not want to engage on the ground with Paul Craig because of Paul Craig's legendary jiu-jitsu, and so he chose to strike with Paul Craig instead. Let's take a look at Paul Craig's record right now. So Paul Craig, he had some good wins. He beat up Mauricio Hua in 2020, making him tap to strikes. Then he basically TKO'd Jamal Hill, just finishing a triangle armbar submission. Then he chokes out Nikita Krylov. That was a really fun fight. He was just getting beaten up in that fight, and then he manages to find the triangle choke on Krylov. Great performance there. He tries to do the same thing against Volkan Ozdemir. Ozdemir just plays it smarter, and he just kind of beats up Paul Craig, beating him by unanimous decision. Does some grappling matches. Then we have the Johnny Walker fight, where we really saw Paul Craig's striking begin to deteriorate, and he goes in for this takedown. Johnny Walker just pounds on him while he is trying to treetop Johnny Walker, gets knocked out there. Goes down to middleweight, so he goes from light heavyweight to middleweight, beats up Andre Muniz. That was a great fight, some good grappling sequences. Paul Craig's striking is not good. He fights against Brendan Allen, gets outstruck and out-grappled on the ground, ultimately succumbing to a rear naked choke in round 3. Then he fights Caio Borralho. Paul Craig is trying to constantly jump guard, force Caio to engage in the ground, where his jiu-jitsu can take over. Caio refuses to go to the ground with Paul Craig and is just piecing him up on the feet. But we need to talk about the fact that, it did take him 7 minutes and 10 seconds to finally knock out Paul Craig, a guy who notoriously does not move his head, has no power in his hands. Maybe that's not true. Maybe he has power, but he has no good delivery mechanism of that power. His striking technique is very poor. And he also doesn't really have a chin. So, like, no defense, not a great chin, and still Caio took like a while to finish him. And now Brendan Allen, he was competing with Paul Craig and he finished him in round 3, but he was grinding Craig down. Like, all I'm trying to do here is set up this MMA math equation. I do think Borralho is better than Paul Craig, which, it's not too difficult to be better than Paul Craig. But is he better than Nasruddin Imavov? Let's take a look at Imavov's record. So Imavov beat Jared Cannonier. He beat Roman Dolidze. He was beating up Chris Curtis. He had a pretty epic fight with Sean Strickland, actually, in my opinion, where he won maybe like 2 of those rounds. I do think Sean Strickland took like the third, fourth, and fifth round. But Imavov was able to stay competitive with him. Styled on Buckley, destroyed Shabazian, destroyed Ian Heinisch, and sure, he lost to Phil Haas 3 years ago, but I think he's improved a lot since then. And we can compare that to Caio Borralho's record, where he's decisioning these unranked guys. When he finally gets into a ranked fight, sure, he looks good, but does he really beat Paul Craig in a way more spectacular than Paul Craig's been beaten before? And I don't know if this is unfair in terms of MMA math, but I do think that Caio Borralho's record isn't great. I think that Jared Cannonier nearly went toe-to-toe with Nasruddin Imavov. Maybe in terms of like his total skills, Cannonier would be like at a 90%, while Imavov would be at 100. He's like 90% of Imavov's skills. I don't think Caio Borralho is up to Nasruddin Imavov's standard. Now that's all MMA math. Let's get into their actual skill set. So Caio Borralho, he has good striking, but a lot of his striking success comes from the fact that he's willing to throw a lot of output at his opponents, kind of overwhelm them, and go to the grappling when that's presented to him. He was looking a little bit uncomfortable against Paul Craig. Paul Craig was able to land good kicks on him, and his striking did not look that clean against Craig. It's a lot of just like kind of wild stuff. But if you throw against Craig, you're going to land on Craig. He doesn't move his head. His reaction time is horrible. If Caio Borralho brings that level of striking into a matchup with Jared Cannonier, I don't think he's going to be successful. Jared Cannonier was able to go tit for tat, toe-to-toe with Nasruddin Imavov, who in my opinion, in terms of striking technique, has some of the best technique in the entire middleweight division. There are other attributes about Nasruddin that kind of bring him down, but in terms of pure technique, I think he is really high level, and Cannonier was able to go toe-to-toe with that. So in terms of the striking, who do I think is going to have the advantage? I think Jared Cannonier is going to have the advantage. Let's also remember that Cannonier did compete against Adesanya, Vettori, Robert Whittaker. He has been in with the best strikers in the game. He beat Sean Strickland in striking. I don't think Caio Borralho's striking is going to be up to the level that is necessary to defeat Cannonier. Let's talk about Caio's grappling. Cannonier is not a grappler, but he is used to fighting against grapplers. Let's go over his record. We had him fight Nasruddin Imavov, who's a big grappler. Marvin Vettori, he is a big grappler. He was going for takedowns on Cannonier. Cannonier was stuffing those takedowns. Israel Adesanya, not a grappler. Strickland, not a grappler. Derek Brunson, big grappler. He did have Vettori down. Vettori always gets back up whenever it gets taken down. Calvin Gastelum, also a pretty big grappler. I don't remember 100%, but I'm sure Calvin shot for takedowns. I do know for a fact Jack Hermanson shot for takedowns on Cannonier. And while Hermanson doesn't have, the best wrestling in the world, he is one of the top wrestlers at middleweight. Cannonier was taken down by him. He always gets back up. Will he be able to get out-wrestled by Caio Borralho? I don't think so. I actually think that if Borralho goes in with a wrestling-heavy game plan, while it's possible he does tire out Cannonier, I think it's more possible that he himself gets tired out, from Cannonier constantly getting back up to his feet or sprawling hard on takedowns, where Borralho will start to fade, and then Cannonier will be able to finish him with his hands. So if Caio Borralho comes out and does a pure striking match, I do think Cannonier is going to be able to outclass him on the feet, and I don't think that Borralho's game, his wrestling game, is going to be super effective against Cannonier. Let's talk about Cannonier's weaknesses right now. So we have here Nasruddin Imavov. This counter shot was actually a shot that Vettori landed on Cannonier too, so this is a weakness of him. But we see here where Cannonier steps forward, he throws this left hand and almost like prepares to clinch up with his opponent. Nasruddin just leans his head to the left and wings his overhand right, which does catch Cannonier, just knocking off his equilibrium. And from there, Nasruddin was able to land enough punches to where Herzog decided to step in and save the fighter. Let's see if we can find some good wrestling exchanges in this fight. So one thing, Cannonier did seem to slow down in this fight. Again, 2 out of the 3 judges gave Cannonier round 3. All of the judges gave him round 1. A big part of his game plan was to press his opponent up against the cage, which I do like. I think that it shows that he is willing to engage in the grappling, and he's going to be willing to engage in the grappling against Caio Borralho. Again, this is kind of standard takedown defense from a lot of fighters at this point, where the fighters will go over to the cage, start fighting the hands, use this cage as a point to prevent your opponent from like gaining better positions on you. You're just eliminating this entire space. You're just eliminating their options, making it easier for yourself to get up. So we see him fighting the hands. Nasruddin rises up with him, and let's just see Cannonier turn this clinch around. As Nasruddin goes for the knee, we see Cannonier turn the clinch. So again, Cannonier has very good wrestling. Let's take a look at this finishing sequence from Caio Borralho against Paul Craig, where, so Paul Craig comes forward, and we see a similar sequence where Cannonier moves forward with his left hand outstretched to punch or clinch up with the opponent. Paul Craig kind of does the same thing. He kind of steps forward with his left hand. But let's see how Caio reacts. So Caio reacts by pretty much just throwing a haymaker. Again, if we go to Nasruddin Imavov, he leaned away from the strike and landed a counter punch. And that's just like some textbook boxing there, because you know that your opponent's head is going to be in that position. Caio Borralho, he kind of closes his eyes. He's clearly not even looking at Paul Craig right now. He's just, he's gritting his teeth. He's closing his eyes and just throwing a huge left hook. And it does happen to catch Paul Craig right on the head. And that's because Paul Craig doesn't move his head. I do think that, he just walks forward, and Borralho has that punch lined up perfectly. Cannonier has much better defense in that. Borralho does follow it up with a pretty nice right hook. And let's just see this finishing sequence. So, not to show too much of this, but jab that misses. And then again, he's just following it up with pretty much these arm punches that, they are missing. Paul Craig's moving in a straight line. Again, even if Cannonier gets rocked, he was rocked against Imavov, and he was surviving pretty well. Imavov had to pick and choose a lot of his shots carefully. We just don't see that same shot selection from Caio Borralho, and that is just another indicator that his striking is not up to the level of the opponents Cannonier is used to fighting. Now, Cannonier is getting older. I do think that his cardio was lacking against the Nasruddin Imavov fight. That could have been from the wrestling. That could have been from the fast pace. It was a very fast-paced fight. We know Borralho puts a good pace on his opponents. But I just don't think that Cannonier's cardio has deteriorated to the point where his skills aren't going to be able to make up for the potential cardio disadvantage that he has. and the age, the wear and tear, and durability factor. I do think that Cannonier's skills are going to be able to compensate for those deficiencies. So ultimately, my decision is going to be, or my prediction will be Cannonier, and I do think that he's actually going to finish Caio Borralho. Borralho doesn't have the best defense. Let's see if we can actually find some areas where he was hit against Paul Craig. What's this little exchange here? But yeah, he doesn't have the best defense in the world. Again, just like he's a little bit wild in there. He doesn't have the fundamentals. He's not as slick a striker as so many of the other opponents that Cannonier has faced. Like, we can look through his resume, and he's faced the best strikers at middleweight: Strickland, Adesanya, Whitaker, even Nasruddin Imavov I would put up there. And he has also, let's be honest, faced some of the best wrestlers. Brunson and Hermanson, even Imavov. Imavov has great wrestling, and he went toe-to-toe with Imavov. I really don't think Caio Borralho is on the level of these guys in terms of striking and grappling. Again, like, this is like shooting fish in the barrel fighting against Paul Craig. He just doesn't move his head. He only throws kicks. And just like, look at these strikes. Why are you trying to counter a leg, like a body kick like this? Checked left hook for that. There's so many better strikes that you could throw there. Paul Craig does not move his head at all. Like, throw a left straight right down the middle. This is the worst possible punch to throw. Even a jab would have knocked Paul Craig backwards. Probably would have wobbled him too. Ultimately, I do think that he's going to be caught with. I do think Caio's going to be caught with something and TKO'd by Cannonier, and I'll say round 3 TKO. And let's just take a look at the odds for this fight on MyBookie. Not a sponsorship. I actually think that MyBookie is a pretty bad website in all, but it does have odds. So let's take a look. UFC main events. Wait, these are the main events. Why am I doing that? As I said, bad website. UFC odds, Cannonier versus Borralho. Scroll to the bottom. Is this it? Oh no. Here we go. Jared Cannonier, plus 178 underdog. Caio Borralho, minus 234. And this is the thing, guys. Like, I think that this is a fight where the odds are going to be very skewed. And the reason for that is, let's take another look at Cannonier's record. So he fought Marvin Vettori, looked great in that fight. Like, literally set a record for most middleweight strikes landed in a fight. Then he fought Nasruddin Imavov and lost. So you have this guy who's on a pretty big win streak. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 fight win streak, 6 fights in the UFC. And he's taking on Cannonier, who's on a losing streak. This is a matchup where a lot of people are going to look at it and say, young guy on a hot win streak, old guy that's losing. I'm going to pick the young guy. But that's a very misleading narrative going into this fight, because we know that Cannonier pretty much went toe-to-toe with Nasruddin Imavov. And we know that Caio Borralho hasn't been looking amazing against these unranked guys. So again, I'm not going to repeat myself. I'm not going to be a broken record. But I am going to bet that Cannonier's age hasn't become too much of a hindrance to him, where it's starting to impact his skills to the point where he's not able to compete with these younger guys. Who's able to compete with Nasruddin, and even though we saw him deteriorate a little bit, maybe in terms of chin, maybe in terms of cardio, his technique, his power, and all of his skills were still there, and I think that those are going to be enough to beat Caio Borralho. That's my prediction. Gonna bring it to you a little early this week. Let me know your guys' thoughts below, and everyone, enjoy the fights. Have a great rest of your day.